and
Oh,
say, it's time to wake up. And that was very odd. But like I said, I never actually saw anything. I did feel cold spots and things like that. So, but I've never seen an apparition. But
well, early in my journey, I was staying at a friend's house. She had an old Victorian house in Tacoma, Washington, and there's three dark entities came at me one at a time, just frightening me. So I held up my hands and I just radiated white light.
mhm,
I just concentrated white light on those dark demons. Three times I had to do this. It's like, okay, this is a test.
mhm,
It's like all these challenges. It's like, okay, here's a test. And I used white light and I got through that. So, and why I use Michael's sword. He wants us to use his sword. He gave us that instruction in the trance a couple months ago. His sword in the Bible, has to do with fighting dark and light, the battle of good and evil. So I use that sword a lot when I am feeling dark, negative, toxic energy.
mhm.
Even my own. When I feel my own energy, I just white light it.
Yeah. Well, I think I think you're very, very right. And I've spoken to a lot of different people over the years, and that eventually they usually all say the same thing. One is that the only way to uh, defeat, you know, evil or negativity or anything like that is through just filling yourself up with love. And
Yeah.
and so, but which is a lot easier for somebody like my wife than it is me. you know, I'm just going to be
Why
honest.
is that?
Well, I don't
Would
know.
you like to tell me?
Well, she's because in a lot of ways it's she just is disposed to be so loving, and so whereas she has to say to me all the time, Kevin, you're taking this too seriously. You're taking that, you're getting too worked up about it and everything like that. And so, but so that's what I'm saying. Even if she's in a situation where she knows I'm upset and I think something's happened that's been wrong or whatever, that then she can come in and say, take a look at it from this standpoint. And so that's really how she's been predisposed. And in a lot of ways, my wife's life, has been more traumatic than mine. So so it's not sometimes not necessarily the experience. It's just, it's your disposition. But at the same,
It's also
yeah,
your past lives
yeah,
and what you come in with.
yeah,
So just celebrate the differences, and you're fine just the way you are, Kevin. Right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
I have my own ways of dealing with things, which is that, and this is sort of, I use humor a lot.
Okay.
People say to me, well, why do you use humor? And I say, well, if you really think about it, and if you can get somebody to really laugh, and I know this because when I was a teacher and things like that, there's nothing worse than a teacher fears is a classroom full of laughing kids because
Yeah.
you cannot control them. You cannot at that point in
Hmm.
time assert any control over people who are really belly laughing. And so it's interesting to me, and a lot of people don't realize that you can't be hypnotized when you're laughing. You can't sort of be possessed. You can't, because you really literally cannot get a hold of that other person's brain at that time. And so
I wonder what brainwave that is.
I,
What
I have I
brainwave?
have I have no idea, and
Yeah.
I'm not speaking of it from a scientific standpoint.
Yeah.
I'm speaking of it of the standpoint of, I mean, we've all been through that. I mean, there's nothing worse than whenever somebody says to you, stop laughing, and then and you can't stop laughing. I mean, it's just, at that point in time, the joy and all these endorphins are going in your brain and everything like that. And you feel like, oh yeah, I can't, deal with that. So I've often thought that, if I woke up and I had, three gray aliens hanging over me, and I started laughing, what would actually happen? It would be interesting. It would be interesting to see, because it seems like a lot of these negative entities, and I don't know that the grays are negative entities. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert, but some people who explain their experiences with gray aliens, for example, explain it as either an emotionless or a negative experience. In other words, that they are in fear and trauma, and the grays don't seem to evoke any emotion back to them or give them any reassurance or let them know anything. In other words, at that point in time, they feel like they're sort of herd cattle, and they're being used for a purpose. And so that's one of those things. It's just a very strange scenario. I don't know.
Well, I have a friend who had that experience.
Really?
She calls them the Anunnaki. These creatures come at her. They try to, oh gosh, I don't want to say terrorize, but they try to frighten her. They come at her, and one night in bed, one was coming right at her, and she was alert, and she started laughing at it, and it disappeared.
Wow.
It just vanished.
Wow.
It dissipated. Yeah. This has happened to her a couple times, so she knows how to do this.
Right. That's amazing.
And I want to say one thing about the emotion. Is I'm new to this UFO community and learning so much all the time, but it sounds like all the entities and what do you call them, androids, all these, all these terms, all these alien beings,
right?
They're emotionless.
Yes.
Sounds like there are a lot of, a lot of robots. So I am starting to realize that as the human species, our gift is the gift of emotion that we could share with them. And maybe as they mingle with us, as they, did they seed us or can we seed them? Mm-hmm. Can we give them some of our intelligence, which is different than theirs?
Right.
And that intelligence is emotional. That's why we've got to honor the feminine.
Right. I think you're perfectly right. I think it is, and if anything, fear. If they do feed off fear, that actually is not doing us any help. I mean, it's one of those things where sometimes if you're in a very I don't know, life-threatening situation, and you've been there with certain people, I mean, you almost develop a sense of humor about it just to kind of cope.
Black humor, they call it, right?
Right, exactly. And,
yeah.
And so, which is not always nice, but it is something that you do find some humor in everything, and I think that you're right. So you're coming to the conclusion based on some of the interviews that you do with people that maybe that these entities are not soul bearers, like as I would call it. I think obviously humans are soul bearers, and some aliens may be soul bearers, and they have quote unquote a soul, but you're saying that maybe some of these little clones or, worker bees or something like that, drones, if you want to call them, for lack of a better word. So some of these sort of biological drones going around are just sort of programmed to do things, and therefore, they're just kind of the people who go out and do the legwork. Is that Is that what you?
Well, are they? Who's programming them?
Right.
And there are the dark, toxic forces, and then there are the light, loving forces. You've got that two yin yang going on. So we are, I think, on this planet out of balance because of there's an excess of darkness. So we want to call in the light beings, the light bearers, bring them in through us, and we need to be that avatar. We need to be that that messenger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you were writing your book and you told your story, do you have other things in it as well, like some of your creative thoughts that you've written down, such as poetry or stories that are not necessarily related to it, or is it more of an autobiography?
It's a story of 40 years of journaling and blogging and lots of different poetry. There is poetry in here, yes. Mm-hmm. And it's about grief. There's a chapter about grief. How do you wear your grief? Your eyes and your mouth and your hands and your feet, everything. You tell your story as you walk through your daily life. Are you wearing grief? Mm-hmm. And just so much about light. How are we shining our light? Are we blocking it? And why are we blocking it? I'm a hypnotherapist, so I get to work with people who go into trance and go into their inner child. In the book, I talk about having a session with my dad. I had to talk to him, and I had to talk to myself as an adult and do some healing work. Mm-hmm. We can do that.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's interesting because I think that a lot of times, so in your hypnotherapy, you were maybe retraining, and let me understand this correctly because I may have this wrong, but are you going back to speak with your hypothetical dad at the time to retrain your brain to say this is my relationship that I wanted, or is that whereas you're actually hypnotizing your father? Is it?
Well, you're inviting your whoever to come and sit beside you, and you have a conversation with that person. Mm-hmm. And it can be whatever you want it to be. That's the incredible part about hypnotherapy is your subconscious or the client's subconscious guides that story. So it can be whatever comes up. If you want to talk to your father as a 6-year-old, you talk to him as a 6-year-old. If you want to talk to him as an adult, you do that. And if you want to talk to your inner child as a 6-year-old, you do that. It's so creative. Right. And it's so healing because you can go back to that time because time is non-dimensional, right? You can go back in a trance and heal yourself and forgive your father. Mm-hmm. Heal your father and forgive yourself. Right. You can do that in a session. And you can do past life regression the same way. It's just a beautiful healing process.
It really is. And I'll just say it. Whenever I was diagnosed with chronic PTSD, I had to see I had to see a counselor for a very, very long time. It wasn't one of those things that was one and done, but what was interesting about it is that when we started to do that, they used a process. I don't know if you've ever used it, and the only reason I'm saying this is because sometimes whenever we have listeners who have PTSD too, they kind of say, well, how do you cope with it? And so one of the things I think that really helped me the best, because believe me, I've had 22 counselors over the years, and and so let's just say I've been to one and left, and been to another one and left, and things like that. And it wasn't until I actually found this one who used what was called EMDR which is a eye movement